today trying to merge cocaine and fentanyl to create new markets.
So prosecutors accuse the officers of providing escort services to drug traffickers in exchange for bribes.
It started like any other quiet Texas morning. But by 8:17 a.m. on January 22nd, 2026, what seemed like a routine traffic stop exploded into one of the wildest discoveries in modern U.S. law enforcement. A plain refrigerated truck was pulled over for a basic inspection. Nothing unusual, right? But when agents swung open those heavy cargo doors, they didn't find fruits or frozen goods. Instead, stacked neatly inside were 100 kilograms of pure methamphetamine, worth more than $8 million. The officers froze for a moment, realizing they had just stumbled into something way bigger than a random smuggler's run. This wasn't just a lucky bust, it was the start of a nationwide investigation that would shake both business and politics. The truck wasn't owned by some shady freelancer. It belonged to Atlas National Logistics, a major shipping company that looked totally legit on paper. Behind that clean corporate image, Atlas had allegedly been running one of the most sophisticated smuggling operations ever seen, using its fleet of trucks to move illegal shipments across state lines, completely undetected. And here's the real kicker. This wasn't just one shipment gone wrong. Investigators say it was just the surface of a massive underground network stretching deep into corporate offices and political circles. Every new clue pulled the curtain back a little further, revealing a tangled web of power, money, and corruption. At first glance, Atlas National Logistics appeared to be your average big-time carrier. Hundreds of trucks, nationwide deliveries, trusted by major retailers. But beneath that polished surface, the company was allegedly built on secrets and lies. For years, it had quietly been running a double life, posing as a professional logistics firm while acting as a cover for one of the largest drug trafficking operations in the country. Atlas looked flawless on paper, a clean, legitimate logistics giant hauling frozen foods and fresh produce to big-name retailers like Walmart and Costco. But behind those shiny trucks and professional paperwork, something way darker was rolling down America's highways. These weren't just delivery vehicles. They were camouflaged drug carriers, sneaking methamphetamine and fentanyl across state lines without raising a single eyebrow. Everything unraveled in San Antonio, Texas, during what was supposed to be a boring routine inspection. A single refrigerated truck, pulled over for a quick check, turned out to be the key to exposing a massive criminal machine. Inside, agents found 100 kilograms of meth, worth millions, and that was just a small piece of the operation. Investigators soon realized this wasn't some one-time deal. It was an entire smuggling network running right under everyone's nose, with Atlas National Logistics at its center. The bust set off an explosive joint investigation by the FBI and DEA, and what they uncovered sent shockwaves through law enforcement circles. Atlas wasn't a clueless company caught in the middle. It was allegedly part of a huge transnational cartel network. Every layer of its business, from warehouses to long-haul routes, was connected to powerful criminal groups moving drugs across the country like a well-oiled machine. This operation ran like clockwork, protected by layers of corruption that reached deep into government ranks. Officials at local, state, and even federal levels were suspected of turning a blind eye, letting the drugs flow freely while Atlas kept up its spotless reputation. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This network had been operating undetected for years, hidden behind money, influence, and political connections. And what came next wasn't just a criminal probe. It was the start of a silent war between law enforcement and one of the most secretive cartels ever exposed. The U.S. government had been bracing for this moment all along. The revelation of Atlas National Logistics' real purpose flipped the script completely. It became a turning point that tore open a web of corruption stretching far beyond the drug trade. What started as a simple discovery was now fueling a massive investigation that exposed not just the cartel's power, but also the political decay that had quietly allowed it to grow unchecked for years. And as the truth began to spill out, the entire operation was about to explode into chaos. That morning at the San Antonio checkpoint was supposed to be nothing special, just another string of random inspections. Federal agents were relaxed, used to the routine. A few trucks might get flagged, a few drivers questioned, and that's it. But not this time. When a trained K9 unit approached one particular refrigerated truck, the dog's behavior instantly changed. Instead of the faint smell of food, it caught something else, something dangerous. The dog started circling the vehicle, growling and pulling hard on the leash. Its handler's instincts kicked in. Something was definitely wrong. The truck belonged to Atlas National Logistics, a name the DEA had quietly been monitoring for months. Yet everything looked perfectly normal at first glance. The driver was calm, paperwork clean, and the cargo list spotless. It was all too perfect, almost rehearsed. Then came the moment that shattered the illusion. As the agents swung open the refrigerated doors, they were hit with an icy wave of cold air and a sight that left them frozen in place. Beneath a neatly stacked layer of fresh produce sat a hidden hydraulic compartment, and inside it, 100 kilograms of methamphetamine, packed tight and worth more than $8 million. That single discovery would rip open one of the deepest criminal pipelines in the nation, marking the start of an investigation that would shake the U.S. from boardrooms to the Capitol. What threw investigators off even more wasn't the drugs, it was the driver's reaction. Most smugglers, when cornered, panic hard. They run, argue, or try to play dumb. But not this guy. He just sat there, quiet and calm, like he already knew what was coming. No fear, no fight, just silence. It was eerie. The real shock wasn't only what was hidden in the truck, but how unbothered the man behind the wheel seemed, as if he had nothing to hide at all. Agents couldn't help but wonder, was he an innocent pawn or something deeper? As they started questioning him, things got strange. His story didn't sound rehearsed, it sounded confused. He genuinely seemed clueless about the secret stash buried inside that refrigerated compartment. He insisted he was just another trucker doing his daily run for Atlas National Logistics, hauling what he thought were perishable goods. And that's when it hit investigators. This setup was genius. The driver wasn't a criminal mastermind. He was a cog in a much bigger, finely tuned machine. He had no clue he was transporting millions in illegal substances. The cartel had built a system so airtight that even their own drivers didn't know they were part of it. Every move was planned to keep the real players invisible while innocent workers unknowingly took all the risk. Even under pressure, the driver stayed calm and helpful, answering every question as best he could. But his words didn't connect the dots. He didn't know who arranged his routes, who loaded the cargo, or who really ran the show. It became clear he'd been recruited under false pretenses, thinking it was just a regular trucking job. This was a classic cartel strategy, using clean, unsuspecting employees as human shields, keeping the real operators safely in the shadows. The biggest twist wasn't just how cleverly the drugs were hidden, but that the man sitting behind the wheel had no idea he'd just driven straight into one of the largest drug busts in U.S. history. He didn't resist. He didn't even try to run, because he had no idea he was being used. The man was completely unaware he'd just become part of one of the biggest cartel takedowns in recent memory. His calm cooperation, though, would soon become a key turning point in the investigation, helping agents inch closer to uncovering the full scale of the operation. But with every new clue, the investigators found themselves facing more questions than answers. How many other drivers out there were unknowingly caught up in the same trap? How many more trucks were moving across the country carrying secret compartments stuffed with illegal cargo? And what about the warehouses? How deep did this rabbit hole go? The more agents dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't just a one-off trick. It was an entire system built on manipulation and lies. The driver was nothing more than a pawn, but that was exactly how the network stayed invisible. Every piece of the operation was designed to look normal on the surface, hiding the cartel's movements in broad daylight. The brilliance and horror of it all was how ordinary it seemed. Atlas National Logistics wasn't just transporting goods, it was transporting a criminal empire right under everyone's noses. Federal agents soon realized the cartel had mastered the art of blending in. By using innocent workers as fronts, they kept the real players buried deep in the shadows, untouchable and unseen. The truth wasn't just about drugs. It was about how a billion-dollar trafficking network had survived for years by hiding in plain sight. That day, the first big crack had finally appeared. They had the driver in custody, the meth seized, and the operations mask starting to slip. But this was just the first layer, a small glimpse of something much larger, darker, and far more dangerous than anyone had expected. Inside that investigation room near San Antonio, as the evidence piled up, the air was thick with tension and disbelief. Everyone knew it. This was only the beginning. The discovery itself was shocking, but what it hinted at was downright terrifying. The truck traced back to Atlas National Logistics, a name that sounded like just another harmless freight company in America's endless web of shipping giants. But when federal agents started digging deeper, it became clear. Atlas wasn't just another logistics firm. It was something much darker hiding behind a polished image of professionalism and profit. At first glance, Atlas looked squeaky clean. A fleet of over 150 trucks hauling produce, frozen foods, and consumer shipments across state lines. Contracts with major retailers, spotless paperwork, and a solid corporate reputation. Everything screamed legit business. But when agents broke open that refrigerated truck's hydraulic compartment, they didn't just uncover drugs. They ripped open the first crack in a perfectly crafted illusion. What the FBI and DEA uncovered next sent chills through every agency involved. Out of those 150-plus trucks, around 100 were indeed doing normal freight runs. But the rest? They were something else entirely. These weren't ordinary rigs. They were rolling drug vaults, custom modified to hide multi-ton shipments of methamphetamine inside secret chambers so advanced they could fool X-ray scanners, drug dogs, and even trained inspectors. The realization struck investigators like a thunderbolt. This wasn't some small-time hustle. It was a massive high-tech operation hiding right under America's nose. The trucks weren't sloppy or suspicious. They were expertly engineered, every hidden compartment masked beneath legitimate goods. Fresh fruit, frozen meats, electronics, you name it. Every delivery route was mapped to appear routine, every logbook clean and airtight. Atlas had turned the nation's supply chain into a Trojan horse, using the very highways and systems that fuel the American economy to smuggle poison across the country. The brilliance of it was terrifying. They weren't sneaking drugs through secret tunnels or border hideouts anymore. They were delivering them straight through the front door of corporate America. The deeper the feds went, the darker it got. Intelligence reports revealed that major cartel networks had been piggybacking on Atlas's infrastructure, pushing enormous amounts of narcotics through the company's legitimate trade routes. It was no longer about border smuggling. It was about infiltration at the heart of U.S. commerce itself. Each new revelation showed just how far the network reached and how carefully it had been hiding in plain sight for years. This wasn't just a case of a few illegal packages slipping through customs. It was a full-scale infiltration of America's shipping system. The deeper investigators dug, the clearer it became. This was systemic, not accidental. The web stretched across the country. Dozens of trucks, multiple warehouses hidden in plain sight, and carefully mapped delivery routes that looked harmless, until agents overlaid them with intercepted cartel communications and prior seizure data. That's when the real picture started to emerge, and it was terrifying. It turned out Atlas National Logistics wasn't just moving meth. The company's trucks had become dual-purpose carriers, sneaking narcotics alongside legitimate shipments like food and retail goods. Hidden among boxes of fruit and frozen meats were shipments of synthetic opioids, including fentanyl and other dangerous substances flooding communities without anyone noticing. The sheer volume of contraband being trafficked through these channels was staggering, something the U.S. hadn't seen on this scale in years. While the final figures for this specific sting were still coming in, past investigations hinted at a growing pattern. Cartels weren't just smuggling drugs anymore. They were building businesses, using legitimate corporate structures as shields. They infiltrated industries, signed real contracts, paid taxes, and operated right under the noses of regulators for months or even years without raising suspicion. What made it all so haunting was how effortlessly this operation blended into everyday American commerce. Trucks bearing Atlas's clean blue logo would drop off pallets of goods in one city, load up fresh produce in another, and roll out again. To anyone watching, it looked like an efficient, well-oiled logistics system. But beneath those shipments was an invisible underground network, moving deadly cargo across the nation with total impunity. Every detail, from paperwork to GPS logs, was crafted to perfection. It wasn't just smart, it was frighteningly precise. By the time the DEA and FBI began working together to cross-reference data, they realized the truth. Atlas had blurred the line between legitimate trade and criminal enterprise so completely that the two had become almost indistinguishable. Then came the chilling realization. For every truck they stopped, for every hidden compartment uncovered, countless others were still out there, cruising down highways, carrying their deadly loads disguised as harmless deliveries. Every logistics hub suddenly looked suspicious, every warehouse a potential front. The question haunting investigators wasn't, when will they stop this, anymore. It was, how deep does this thing go? And even more disturbing, how many innocent workers were unknowingly carrying the weight of a criminal empire across the country. Using legitimate freight trucks wasn't just a clever cover, it was a strategic masterstroke. Atlas National Logistics had found a way to blend an international drug network right into the heart of America's daily infrastructure, invisible to the millions who depended on it. It wasn't just deception, it was infiltration on a national scale, and it left investigators shaken. Could every normal delivery truck on the road actually be hiding something far more sinister? That question hung heavy in the air. Were these fleets of legal, branded trucks actually the perfect disguise for a criminal empire, quietly moving poison and fear across the country? The more investigators peeled back the layers, the uglier the truth became. What started as a massive drug case was quickly mutating into something deeper, political, powerful, and far-reaching. Every document suddenly mattered. Every phone call carried the weight of potential corruption. According to federal court filings and statements from the U.S. Department of Justice, Atlas National Logistics didn't just survive because of good engineering or business strategy. It thrived because it was protected. Behind the scenes, a safety net of influence and power had been shielding the company for years. Records revealed that more than 20 U.S. officials, across local, state, and even federal levels, were connected to the company's activities in some form. These weren't just rumors or loose associations. These were hard links found through subpoenaed call logs, zoning approvals, warehouse permits, and internal communications carefully examined by both the FBI and the DEA. On paper, Atlas looked pristine. It passed safety checks, cleared logistics audits, and maintained flawless compliance records. But beneath that spotless reputation, something, or someone, was quietly pulling strings. Whenever a shipment seemed suspicious or a warehouse drew too much attention, mysterious interventions kept occurring. Investigators noticed that inspections were suddenly delayed, rerouted, or canceled without clear reason. Warehouse permits got fast-tracked even when red flags were raised. In one alarming pattern, phone records showed a series of short, precisely timed calls placed just before these inspections, followed by abrupt cancellations mere minutes later. It was becoming impossible to ignore. The operation wasn't just protected by clever smuggling tactics, it was shielded by corruption reaching deep into government systems. Every new document, every log entry, painted a darker picture of how deeply Atlas's web had spread. What looked like a clean freight company on the outside was, in reality, a state-protected machine, operating in plain sight while trafficking millions in illegal drugs across America's highways. None of these actions alone screamed corruption, but when investigators lined them up side by side, the pattern was impossible to ignore. It was like watching puzzle pieces snap into place, revealing something far bigger than anyone expected. According to Reuters reports on past cartel-linked logistics scandals, this kind of administrative shielding has become a favored move, keeping major smuggling networks alive and thriving for years without setting off alarms. What made this case so disturbing was how subtle the protection seemed. There were no shady meetings, no loud political favors, just quiet, invisible moves buried deep inside normal bureaucracy. Files went missing. Alerts were mysteriously downgraded. Tips that should have climbed the chain of command somehow stalled halfway. From the outside, everything looked routine. From the inside, Atlas was being wrapped in silence, a bureaucratic fog that made it untouchable. Federal prosecutors later explained that this type of soft protection is often far more dangerous than blatant obstruction. According to the Department of Justice's own assessments of large-scale trafficking cases, today's criminal networks don't always rely on direct bribes anymore. They use indirect political cover instead. By blending in with everyday government processes, they leave almost no trace, no cash trails, no suspicious favors, just quiet compliance that protects the system without anyone noticing. And Atlas fit that model almost perfectly. The company didn't demand loyalty from officials. It simply benefited from convenience. Permits got approved faster than normal, delays disappeared, and suspicious shipments were waved through under the radar. It wasn't coincidence, it was design. As investigators pored over months of intercepted messages, bank transfers, and logistics logs, the scale of the protective shield became terrifyingly clear. Atlas had managed to move illegal shipments across multiple states without ever setting off the kind of scrutiny that usually comes with repeated high-volume cargo runs. This wasn't luck, it was strategy. A system built to slow down investigations just enough to keep the operation running smoothly, never drawing too much heat, but never stopping completely. And then came the most uncomfortable question of all. Were those officials who appeared in the records knowingly protecting a criminal empire? Or were they unknowingly manipulated, caught in a system engineered to exploit gaps in oversight and trust? Some approvals may have been signed without full context. Some alerts might have been ignored because of routine fatigue. But either way, one thing was clear. Atlas National Logistics had turned the cracks in America's bureaucracy into its own personal armor, shielding a criminal empire in plain sight while the country kept on moving, unaware of the storm rolling beneath its highways. Some of those intercepted calls may have sounded harmless, routine even, quick check-ins, casual sign-offs. But others? They carried tones of awareness that investigators just couldn't ignore. And that uncertainty cut deep. It became the emotional core of the entire case. Because if even a handful of those involved knew what Atlas really was, then this wasn't just another drug operation. It was a collapse of trust at some of the highest levels of authority. And if they didn't know, that was almost worse. It proved just how fragile and vulnerable the system had become. By this stage, the investigation had changed completely. It wasn't about tracking trucks or counting seized packages anymore. It was about accountability. It was about how a criminal empire had learned to blend into the very institutions designed to destroy it. The net was closing, but the truth waiting inside it was hard to face. Investigators were haunted by one question that no one could escape. Were these officials knowingly protecting a criminal network? Or had the system itself been bent so quietly that no one noticed until it was too late? The answer could change everything. By the time the case moved from investigation to direct action, the tension around Atlas National Logistics was electric. What started as quiet monitoring and document tracing exploded into a full-scale, multi-state operation designed to hit the cartel where it hurt most, fast and hard. According to official statements from the U.S. Department of Justice, this coordinated strike brought together elite teams from both the FBI and DEA, operating in sync across multiple states to prevent leaks, tip-offs, and last-minute escapes. This wasn't a warning, it was a takedown. For months, agents had been building evidence, mapping the network, and tracking movements. Now, it was time to act. In a single sweeping motion, authorities seized an astonishing 52 tons of narcotics, including methamphetamine and fentanyl, and took took over 180 suspects into custody across 12 states. The scale of the operation was staggering, one of the largest in modern U.S. law enforcement history. But even with those numbers, the atmosphere was heavy. Investigators knew they weren't just dismantling a smuggling ring. They were tearing open a wound that exposed how deeply corruption and complacency had allowed this empire to grow. Every arrest, every warehouse raid, every truck impound wasn't just about drugs. It was about reclaiming trust in a system that had been quietly twisted from within. As agents stood over mountains of seized contraband and stacks of forged documents, one chilling truth settled in. The real battle wasn't just against the traffickers. It was against the system that let them exist in plain sight. And for the first time, the U.S. government was forced to confront just how close that line between order and chaos had become. These jaw-dropping figures were later confirmed in federal filings and echoed by major outlets like Reuters, which has closely tracked the evolution of large-scale U.S. drug enforcement operations. Similar multi-state cartel-linked takedowns in recent years have revealed a sobering truth. Modern drug empires don't operate like chaotic street gangs anymore. They run like corporations, built on precision, hierarchy, and coordination instead of violence and chaos. Inside the Atlas network, the fallout was instant. Warehouses that once hummed quietly with late-night shipments suddenly turned into war zones of flashing lights and shouting agents. Phones that never stopped ringing went dead. Delivery routes that had been active for years went completely dark overnight. Drivers who had once believed they were just anonymous parts of the machine now found themselves face-to-face with federal interrogators. The psychological shock hit almost as hard as the arrests themselves. Even those who hadn't yet been detained felt the ground collapse beneath them. They knew the invisible safety net that had protected them for years was gone. Panic spread through the ranks, but it wasn't the usual scramble to escape. It was the slow realization that their entire world had just fallen apart. What made this phase of the operation truly explosive was the exposure of high-level corruption that surfaced alongside the massive drug seizures. As the Department of Justice later revealed in its public briefings, these arrests weren't just about busting traffickers. They peeled back the layers of a much bigger story: how deeply criminal enterprises had intertwined with political power. Investigators traced patterns that were impossible to ignore: delayed inspections, suspiciously approved permits, and administrative shortcuts that lined up too neatly to be random. It all matched the same warnings federal watchdogs had been sounding for years: that cartels have shifted away from blatant bribery toward covert political protection, manipulating the system instead of fighting it. And then, something unexpected happened. Uncertainty spread faster than fear. Once the arrests began, the silence broke. People who had kept their mouths shut for years started to talk, realizing their once safe positions were now crumbling. Some confessed, hoping for leniency. Others flipped sides completely, offering intel in exchange for protection. The old belief that Atlas's reach was untouchable vanished overnight. Everyone inside the network understood the new reality. The so-called protection that once made them feel secure had evaporated, and resisting now only meant going down harder. The entire Atlas empire was collapsing from within, not just because of law enforcement pressure, but because its own people no longer believed in its invincibility. The silence that had kept the operation alive for so long was finally breaking, and there was no turning back. This was the breaking point, the moment Atlas stopped running and started falling apart from the inside out. The empire didn't collapse with explosions or gunfire. It unraveled piece by piece as its leaders vanished, its workers flipped, and its operations froze in place. For federal investigators, this stage went far beyond simple numbers. Yes, the seizure of billions worth of narcotics was historic, and yes, hundreds of arrests shattered the cartel's logistics chain. But the true impact ran much deeper. According to data from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, synthetic drug overdoses, especially involving methamphetamine and fentanyl, have claimed hundreds of thousands of American lives over the last decade. Massive trafficking networks like Atlas drugs weren't just moving money, they were fueling a national health crisis. Every shipment intercepted wasn't just a legal win, it was potentially lives saved from the deadly grip of synthetic drugs that have devastated entire communities. As Atlas crumbled, the US government made its stance crystal clear. This wasn't about a symbolic victory. It was about proving that with time, strategy, and relentless coordination, even the most untouchable criminal network could be brought to its knees. Officials called it a blueprint for modern enforcement, a war fought with intelligence, patience, and precision instead of sheer force. But even in victory, a heavy question lingered. Taking down one network doesn't erase demand, and it doesn't stop the rise of the next ambitious operation waiting in the shadows. As court hearings began and media coverage spread, the country was left staring at a sobering truth. The Atlas case had exposed not only corruption and criminal ingenuity, but also the scale of America's ongoing battle with addiction and supply. The takedown had shaken the criminal underworld, warning every organization that no one was truly safe, not even those hiding behind corporate logos and legal contracts. Yet, as the dust settled, the challenge that loomed ahead felt bigger than ever. The question echoing through every courtroom, every agency, and every headline was haunting and real. Can dismantling one empire truly change the future of drug crime in America? Or did this massive victory simply reset the battlefield, clearing the way for the next network waiting to step in, learn from Atlas's fall, and rebuild smarter, quieter, and deeper underground? The case had ended, but the war it represented was far from over. As the full scale of this operation came into focus, one truth could no longer be ignored. The storming of the Texas logistics hub wasn't just another drug bust. It wasn't staged for headlines or political points. It was a strategic masterclass in control. Without chaos, without a single shot fired, federal agents used precision, coordination, and sheer patience to bring down a network that had once believed it could hide in plain sight forever. From the US government's perspective, this was more than enforcement. It was a message, a signal that even the most carefully hidden criminal empires could be dismantled with intelligence and persistence, not just brute force. The operation proved that modern law enforcement doesn't always need raids and mayhem to win. It just needs the right data, the right timing, and the courage to pull the trigger on years of quiet investigation. According to official findings from the US Department of Justice, major trafficking organizations have evolved far beyond street-level chaos. They now depend on logistics, technology, and political shielding instead of open violence. And that's what made Atlas so dangerous. It wasn't a bloody cartel. It was a corporate-style empire, running its criminal trade through legitimate infrastructure, hidden under invoices, shipping manifests, and boardroom strategy. That's also what made this takedown so critical. It exposed the blueprint of modern organized crime, showing how corruption can quietly thread itself through legitimate systems that millions of Americans rely on every day. This wasn't just about one company being corrupt. It was about how easy it had become for crime to blend into commerce itself. The impact reached far beyond warehouses and courtrooms. It hit straight at the country's heart. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, has repeatedly confirmed that synthetic drugs like methamphetamine and fentanyl have fueled record-breaking overdose deaths, claiming hundreds of thousands of American lives over the past decade. And behind every one of those numbers stood networks just like Atlas, silent, strategic, and devastatingly effective until now. Networks like Atlas play a direct and devastating role in America's ongoing drug crisis. Their downfall may mark a victory on paper, but this story doesn't end with celebration. From a strategic view, the US gained the upper hand, proving that patience and intelligence can dismantle even the most sophisticated criminal empires. But history paints a darker picture. Criminal organizations always adapt. When one collapses, another studies its mistakes, rebuilding stronger, smarter, and harder to detect. That's the unsettling truth behind operations of this scale. The real question now isn't whether the US can win, it's whether it can stay ahead. Can American law enforcement outthink the next wave of traffickers who blend business, politics, and technology so seamlessly? Or are we trapped in an endless cycle, where every takedown simply reshapes the battlefield for the next hidden empire waiting to rise? If you want to dive deeper into how modern power, intelligence, and cutting-edge tech drive battles that never make it to the evening news, make sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe to Military Power. This is where the hidden conflicts come into focus, the ones that shape the world from the shadows. We only report what is of interest to the public, without any intention to confirm or speculate about anyone's private life. All information is presented for entertainment and commentary purposes only.